Good morning. You know, it's not the quality of the prayer or the song leading or any of those things that really matters. It's the willing spirit to do it. And we have some who are very willing to serve, and Emery has served in many capacities for us, and I'm very grateful for those who are willing to do that. And we encourage everyone who is able to serve in those areas to do so. It's very rewarding for all of us. So we're going to finish up our sermon series for this month. I think we've kind of started in a little bit late, but we've gone two sermons, I think. I'm kind of lost track at this point, but we're on our third, and so we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up and continue to talk about rank in the kingdom as our topic has been for the last couple of weeks. And so I was kind of thinking about our text this morning, and I was kind of, as a parent, you know, I think about some things that my kids say and do and how they interact with one another in our household. And I'm sure that if you're a parent or a grandparent, or really if you've been around kids for any length of time, there is a phrase that I am sure that you have all heard, and usually takes place when kids are interacting with one another, and maybe it's lunchtime and the sandwiches are all being cut, you know, and one of the little kids look over and they see that their sibling or their friend has a larger half of the sandwich, and they look over there and they say, "That's not what? It's not fair." Right? We've heard that before, you know. I mean, we've heard that before. I've heard that before so many times. I've probably even said that before. But we say that's not fair, right? It's not fair that they have the bigger half of the sandwich. It's not fair. Or it's not fair when somebody, a child usually, right, you know, has more blocks than I do, you know, and you say, well, they have more blocks than me. That's not fair. And we see kids interact in this way, and we think about how they interact, and as adults, we look at these situations and we say, well, you know, as a mature adult, I would never do something like that, and I think this whole argument is silly. I mean, you know, the sandwiches aren't really that much bigger, you know, if you put them side by side, and really it's only a couple of more blocks. What's the big deal? We kind of think that way. We kind of think in ways that say, well, it's not important, you know, it's not a big deal, but to a it's a big deal, right? I mean, kids think this way because they want to be recognized as the one that has the more blocks, as the one who has the larger sandwich. They're not going to eat it all anyway. I don't know what the big deal is, but they want it, right? Because they want to have it. And it's very rare, if ever, in fact, I don't really know if I've ever heard a child say this, for a child to look over and see that their sibling, their brother or sister or their friend has the larger half of the sandwich, and for that child to turn around and congratulate them. You know, have you ever heard that before? Have they ever said, "No, congratulations, I'm so happy that you have the bigger half of the sandwich. Yeah, I think that is just fantastic. I think that's wonderful." Or, "I'm so happy that you have more blocks than me because I just think that's great because I love you and I think you should have more blocks than me." How often does that ever happen? It's not very often, right? It's very seldom that would ever happen in that scenario. But we as an adult, we think, you know, that should happen, right? You should be happy for your brother or your sister or your friend. You should be happy that they have more than you. You should be grateful, you know, that you even have a sandwich. You know, you should be grateful that you even have blocks. And we say those things, you know, because we consider ourselves too mature to get into those kind of arguments, to get into those kind of debates, that to make it in such a way that we feel like having more makes me greater than somebody else, because we're just too mature for that. But then we turn around and we go out into the world, we go into our workplace, our place of work, and we do the exact same thing. right? When we're at work and somebody at work gets the promotion that we wanted, and maybe they haven't been there quite as long as we have, and we look at that promotion and we say, I want that promotion, and then that day comes and we do not get that promotion. And somebody else who was there less gets it, and we look at that situation, and what do we say? That's not fair, right? Because we rank ourselves and we rank our position in society based on these kinds of things, just like a child ranks their position, how much does mommy love me, is she going to give you the bigger half of the sandwich, They want to have that status, and we want it too. We want it too. And we may not admit it, we may not see it in our own lives on an everyday basis, but we do the exact same thing, and we say the same kinds of things. And the reason is because we have been taught by the world, we have been taught from a young age, from an early age, not to congratulate people when they get the bigger half. Not to congratulate people when they have more. Not to congratulate people who get the larger half of the sandwich. And we have been trained not to be happy for people when they have and we have not. That has been part of our culture, that we are striving to be better than, and greater than, and bigger than, and have more than. And we tend to be that way because that is how our culture seems to function, right? And I was thinking about this. We even listen to people who we recognize as being more, quote unquote, successful than we are. There was some article recently about some, teenage singer having an opinion about politics, and people were listening to her. And I'm thinking, who is she? Who do we pay attention to? We pay attention to people we believe have achieved some level of success in their lives. And we look at them as greater than. And it's part of how we've been conditioned to think about people and circumstances and things. And we look at the work position and we say, I want that, and we don't get it, and we get upset and we cry out, it's not fair. It's not fair. And part of that is because we want to be noticed, and we want to be recognized. And we're kind of afraid that we're not going to be noticed, and we're not going to be recognized. And we're afraid that if we're the kind of people who congratulate somebody for getting more than we have gotten, or that promotion, or whatever the circumstance may be, and when we are the kind of person who is happy that somebody has when we may have not, that the world is going to take advantage of us. That we're going to be taken advantage of, that our actions of generosity and showing people that this is not important, that this is something that you can have, this is something that you are welcome to, and I will take the smaller portion, that level of generosity, that selfless act is going to go unnoticed. Sometimes we feel that way. Or sometimes we feel like it's going to be noticed and unrewarded. And we are hesitant to live that kind of life and have that kind of attitude because deep down inside, we still have that little kid that's saying, that's not fair. But you know what we have been studying when we've been talking about Matthew and reading through Matthew and studying Jesus' definition of what the kingdom of heaven is that the kingdom of heaven does not work that way, right? We do not recognize within the kingdom of heaven greatness based on who has the larger half, or who has the more blocks, or who has and who has not. That is not how God ranks people in the kingdom of heaven versus the haves and the have-nots, the strong and the weak, that's not where God looks when he wants to recognize people as great in his kingdom. We are not placed in positions because of what we have and what we have not. But the world does, doesn't it? In fact, the world says things like this, that the first shall be first, and the last will be last. It's how the world thinks. It's how we've been conditioned to think. It's how things seem to be, how the world, the kingdoms of the world seem to function, that the first are always going to be first and the last are always going to be last. And if you want to be great, then somehow you're going to have to make it from the last to the first, or you will always be the last. But the kingdom of heaven says this, that the last shall be first. And what will happen to the first? They will be last. And so Jesus wants to illustrate this and make this point, and he does so in Matthew chapter 20. So if you have your Bibles, open up to Matthew chapter 20. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 16. Jesus uses the illustration of a vineyard and a landowner to demonstrate the way of the kingdom. How the kingdom is not like the world. How the kingdom does not view things like the world views things. That the kingdom of heaven is not focused on the first being the first and the last being the last, but recognizes the weak, the humble, the meek as those who will actually be the first. So if you have your Bibles open, and in verse 1, it starts off this way. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. So just kind of following through the story, the kingdom of heaven is like what? What is the kingdom of heaven like? A landowner, right? The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner. So there's our focus. And so we might word it this way to help us understand this a little better, that the way of the kingdom is like this landowner's dealings with his workers. You know, that's where Jesus is putting his focus in the parable. And so the disciples would have been extremely familiar with this story. They would have recognized on a daily basis, 6 a.m., you go out, any vineyard, any place, there will be people standing around waiting to be hired so that they can earn their day's wage. Any given day, this was a situation that they passed by and saw on a daily basis. People standing around, people trying to get there first, people trying to be the first ones on the scene, people revealing themselves as the strong and the mighty and the smart and the ones who are hireable, trying to pine for position so that when the landowners and the foremen come to pick their workers for the day, that they're going to be the first ones to be picked. Look at verse 2. Jesus says, when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into the vineyard. So an average day's wage. That's what he's talking about. So he just says that he made an agreement. It was an average day. Nothing new, right? Everything has been going like this for centuries. The landowner comes, he makes an agreement with these people that he has chosen, and he will pay them a fair wage in verse 3. And he went about on the third hour, and he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. So these are those who had not quite been hired at the first onset of the day. And then verse 4 says, and to those he said, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. And so they went. Verse 5, again he went out about the 6th and the 9th hour, and did the same thing. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing around. And he said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day long? And verse 7, it says, and they said to him, because no one has hired us. And he said, you go into the vineyard also. All right? And so we might think about it this way, on our day schedule time, theirs was 6 to 6. Ours is generally 8 to 5, ish. I don't really know if that matters anymore these days. But the idea is a lot of people get off at 5 o'clock. And so you can imagine you've been there since 8 o'clock in the morning, and you've worked the whole day and done a majority of the work in the hot sun, and you've labored and you've done all these things. And at the very last hour, the manager, the boss, whomever, brings in some extra workers, from 4 to 5, the end of the day, and hires them to come in and only spend this hour of time. Now, here's what I want us to think about for just a moment. Why were these not hired? if you've been reading through Matthew, you recognize that Matthew puts a lot of emphasis in this idea that Jesus is calling people who are seemingly weak to be great in the kingdom. That when we studied the Sermon on the Mount, it wasn't going to be the Pharisees, it wasn't going to be the scribes, it wasn't going to be the mighty and the powerful of society that were going to be the people of the kingdom, but it's going to be the meek. It's going to be the persecuted. It's going to be the weak. It's going to be the seemingly insignificant people of society that are going to suddenly become great in the kingdom of heaven. And in this case, nobody is going to earn this position. They're not going to pine for this position. They're not going to make it by becoming and making themselves great. But God will make them great, even in their weakness, even in their hopelessness, right? And so we think about these people. Why were they not hired? Why would a landowner not want to hire these people at the beginning? Well, maybe they're part of this group that Jesus has been speaking to and talking to and communicating about. Maybe they are the crippled. Maybe they are the weak. Maybe they are the unhirable people of society. Maybe that's what is going on here. And maybe, just maybe, some have suspected that maybe the landowner is Jewish and these are Gentiles and they didn't get hired because the Jews got hired. I don't know. But the point is that I believe that these people were unhirable. That there's a reason they didn't get hired. Nobody hired them for a reason. But this landowner, not only does he hire them, but he hires them at the very last hour. And not only is he going to hire them, but he's going to pay them a full day's wage to work 1 hour in the shade of the day, right? When everybody else worked in the sun, in the heat, and he's going to take care of them. And in a culture, now we may not think about this as all that significant, except for they lived in a culture where you bought your food either that day or the day after with the wages that you made for the day, right? So if you made your wages for today, that's going to provide for your family tomorrow. There's not going to the First Bank of Jerusalem and putting some money in and pulling it out with your debit card, And so they made their money, they bought their money and provided for their families. What about these? How many days have they gone? How many days have they been passed by landowner after landowner and foreman after foreman because of some reason why they are not hireable? But yet, here they are, working in this vineyard. But not just for an hour's wage, right? But for a full day's wage. This landowner gives them an amazing gift. It's an amazing gift of generosity towards these people. And in verse 8, it says, when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call all the laborers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last group first. Now, you think, okay, that's kind of, he knows what he's going to do, right? And he knows that this isn't going to bode well with some of these people, because that's how people tend to be. They get pretty jealous. And he calls these first people in, or these last people rather in, and he's going to pay them. So everybody's going to be watching this as it unfolds. So he pays the last group. And it says in verse 9, when those hired about the 11th hour came, each one received a denarius. Now, what do you think that first group thought right then? I mean, they didn't know what was going on exactly, but they see that the landowner is giving out a full day's wage for 1 hour. What are they thinking? Oh man, it's coming. I'm about to get a bunch of money. I mean, if I worked all this time, all day long in the hot sun, and I labored all day, that if they got a full day's wage for 1 hour, imagine what I'm going to get, right? They're looking forward to the reward. Why? Because they're obviously greater than those who work the last hour. That's what they're thinking. I have more. I put more time in. I've invested more in labor. I was hired first. Therefore, I'm more hireable than you are. I have everything going for me. So that makes me great. That makes you not as great as me. And if you, the lesser than, have received so much, just think about what I'm going to receive, right? They're not congratulating those at the last hour, but they are recognizing themselves as being greater in status. Look at verse 10. And when those hired the first came, they thought that they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. That's kind of we can't help but feel kind of sad for him a little bit. I mean, we would all kind of feel that way, like, oh man, I really thought I was going to get more, but I didn't get more. And then in verse 11, when they received it, they grumbled. They grumbled. They were mad. They were angry. They grumbled at the landowner, saying, "These last men have worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us. How dare you, How dare you make these people, these unhirable people that you brought in at the last hour and you paid a full day's wages even though we did all the work, how dare you make them equal to us, who are obviously greater than they are? How dare you make them equals to us, who have borne the burden in the scorching heat of the day," right? And they would obviously say, they're saying, that's not fair. That's not fair. It's not fair. I deserve more. I have done more. I am the greater, right? And if they have received all of that for just 1 hour's work, a whole day's wage, then I deserve to receive more. Instead of congratulating them, instead of congratulating the landowner and congratulating these workers and saying to them, "Congratulations, I'm glad that you received more. I'm glad that this landowner hired you. I'm glad that you had a job. I'm glad that you can feed your family. I'm glad that you're able to eat. I am so glad for the generosity of this landowner that you received equal as me. Even though I worked more, I was there longer, and you came in at the last hour. Congratulations. I'm happy for you." But they didn't do it, right? They didn't do it because what are they looking at? They're saying, no, he got the bigger half of the sandwich, and I got the little half of the sandwich, and I want the bigger half of the sandwich, and I'm going to complain to the person who made the sandwich for me because I want the bigger half. Or they have more blocks than I do, and I have less blocks, and I want more blocks, and I'm going to grumble and complain, and I'm going to cry out, "It's not fair," because I demand what I believe I deserve. I want the larger half. I want more blocks. I want to be paid more for my labor and my work. But it's hard not to somehow, in some way, agree with these people, right? I mean, just thinking about the scenario and thinking about the situation and thinking about our own lives, there have been times, I'm speaking in general terms, but I'm sure there have been times in each and every one of our lives where we have been just simply happy that we got the greater half. We've been happy and satisfied that we have gotten more and somebody else got less. And we have walked away with a smile on our face and we've said, I feel kind of bad for them, but I'm sure glad I'm not in their shoes. That we have put ourselves in positions where we have placed priority upon ourselves and not priority upon other people. And we have done that, haven't we? I've done that. And I'm sure you have done that. Look at verse 13. Verse 13 says, "But he answered and he said to one of them, 'Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius?'" I mean, isn't that our agreement? I mean, early in the morning when I hired you, yeah, you were the better worker, right? I mean, you were the more hireable, and I hired you. I hired you to come work in my vineyard. And I paid you a fair wage, and I made an agreement with you at the very beginning that I was going to take from my money, my resources, and I was going to pay you what you deserve. Did I not do that? Did I not fulfill that agreement? Take what is yours and go. But I wish to give to this last man, the crippled, the unhirable, the one who is not going to be able to feed his family tomorrow, the one who is not going to be able to eat because he wasn't hired. For whatever reason, he wasn't hired, the lesser. But I give to this last man the same as I give to you. In verse 15, "Is it not lawful for me to do what I wish with what is my own?" For is your eye envious because I am generous? Instead of praising the landowner for his generosity, his compassion, his love, instead of praising him for giving to these unhireable people, they criticize him and they grumble and they complain. And the landowner says, no, it's not that I'm doing you any injustice. It's not that I'm being unfair. It's not that I'm doing anything unlawful. I made this agreement with you and you agreed, and it was a good agreement, and you did your work and you got your pay. But it's my land and it's my money, right? And if I want to hire at the last hour these people to be generous, to be compassionate, to be loving, to bring them in and treat them as equals to you, well, that's what I will do. And that is my business, right? And Jesus is saying that the kingdom of heaven is like this landowner. That the kingdom of heaven, the way of the kingdom is like this landowner and his dealings with his employees. And then Jesus says in verse 16, did I already put that one in there? Oh, I missed it, didn't I? Oh, wow, okay. He says in verse 16, so the last shall be first, and the first will be last. Right? Jesus is making this point, right? The whole time we've been talking about being humble. We've been talking about rank in the kingdom. We've been talking about how Jesus is turning this whole thing upside down, that if you want to be great, that if you want to be the greatest in the kingdom, it's not going to be by military power. It's not going to be by force. It's not going to be by money. It's not going to be by the standard of greatness that the world imposes on you, but it's going to be by becoming like little children. Right? It's going to be by making yourself crippled and making yourself lame for the sake of the kingdom. It's going to be different. It's going to be like this landowner who hires at the last hour these unhireable people and makes them equals to those who were hired at the beginning. That is how the kingdom of heaven works. That is how rank in the kingdom works. So if you're coming into this scenario and you think that you're going to be great and you think that you're going to be able to earn a position of greatness through power and strength and money and pedigree or whatever it is you believe that you have that's greater than somebody else's, you're in the wrong place, buddy. It's the wrong kingdom. Because the kingdom that you have come to is a kingdom that takes those who are seemingly less and makes them great. Those who humble themselves for the sake of the kingdom, that keep themselves pure and give up on the pursuit of trying to earn a position of power, but allowing it to be a gift to use for the glory of God and the kingdom, that these are the kind of people that God is going to take and he's going to bring them into his kingdom. And that is going to be the way of his people. And if that doesn't interest you, if that's not what you want, if you're looking for something else, then there are other kingdoms out there that you can go and bow down to. But the kingdom of heaven is not it. That the kingdom of heaven is like this landowner who is generous and he's loving and he's compassionate. And folks, we should be incredibly grateful. We should be incredibly grateful that the kingdom of heaven is like this landowner, right? We should be incredibly grateful that the last will be first and the first will be last, because that means that people like me and people like you who truly are undeserving of a day's wages, undeserving of the kingdom of heaven, can receive a day's wages, can receive the kingdom of heaven, can be equal to those who are obviously greater than we are in the world. We should be incredibly thankful. You should be incredibly thankful that your value, your greatness is not measured by how popular you are. We're not in high school anymore, right? It's not measured by how popular you are. It's not measured by how powerful you are. It's not measured by what status you have earned for yourself in society, but your value, your rank in the kingdom is based on God's generosity and God's compassion and God's mercy towards you. And he has allowed you to become part of his kingdom, a citizen in the greatest kingdom that has ever existed and will ever exist. That you have been adopted into a family of royal pedigree, that you have been brought in through generosity of the landowner, and we need to be happy. Not only just happy, but we need to congratulate one another and congratulate others when God invites other people into the kingdom. And we might look at that other person and think of, as a society would, and say, well, they don't have much. They're not as great as some of the rest of us. They don't have wealth. They don't have the prosperity. They don't have popularity. They don't have those things. But we need to congratulate them, right? And recognize that God's not looking for that. That God is not looking for that. Thankfully so. God is not looking for that to make us part of his family. But he is bringing in everyone, the lame, the crippled, the blind, the children, everyone to come and be part of his kingdom, because those are the kinds of people he's looking for. Those who humble themselves in the presence of God so that God may lift them up. And we need to be incredibly thankful for that. Not only should we be thankful, but we need to also model that generosity in our own lives, right? Not to show personal favoritism towards one over another, because we might think that one person in the church may be more beneficial than another person in the church, or we might recognize, well, that person can do this for me and this for me. And then somehow we start to rank one another in positions of power and authority. But that's not how the kingdom works. It's not how the kingdom works. But we go to the highways and the byways. We go to the places where people don't go. And we find people that need the kingdom, which is everyone. That need to be lifted up, which is everyone. And we work with God to call them in, to become part of this community and to serve them and to love them and to treat them as equals. And if you don't think that's important, then you've missed the point, because that is what God has done for you. Because in the grand scheme of things, you are the lesser, but he has made you the greater. And you need to humble yourself into that position and serve God to your fullest. Not to earn any kind of position, but because he has made you great, you serve to the greatest ability that you have, that he has gifted you. You have been adopted to a great family. You have been brought into a wonderful kingdom by the generosity of our Heavenly Father. Enjoy that and live it out. If there's anybody here this morning who needs prayers from the congregation, if you are struggling, if you're weak, if you need help in any way that you need help, please come forward as we stand and as Joe sings a song for us. But if you are in need of putting on Jesus in baptism and becoming part of this kingdom and becoming part of this family, that is extended to you as well. Please stand as we sing.